Estela and Mariana got a turn in their lives when one of them gets involved with people from the favela and from the drug trade. Always challenging, the youngest will spend her days in search of emotions that not always have a good result. How would this end? Is it possible to escape from the results generated by bad choices? Let's go together in search of the answers. I hope you enjoy it very much, but first, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give your like and share it with your friends. The Fifth Amendment by M. Rubio. No person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. Part 1. Do you know this gun?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
The whole family came to know her. Everyone wanted to see the little girl who had been a gift, a miracle. 10 years of trying to be a mother without success had convinced Maria that she would never be part of the life miracle. She had gone through many phases, from the euphoria of planning what her baby would be like, the choice of names, if being a boy or a girl, even what university would go to. Everything was planned, but the baby wasn't arriving. Over time, she was sure that something was wrong and got Jose to agree to go with her to the doctor. There were many tests, which Maria underwent with the great hope of finding the cause of her infertility and thus being able to correct it. Hormonal dosing, transvaginal ultrasound, endometrium biopsy, uterus, tubes and cervix anatomical integrity, incompatibility between sperm and eggs, endometriosis. The exams did not cause any pain, except psychological. Facing each result, she was already prepared for what could mean to be the culprit for not being able to fulfill her big dream, motherhood. But all the results showed the opposite. There was no problem. It wasn't her. Then, Jose also underwent tests. At first, they did a thorough analysis of his medical history, infections history, traumas, surgeries, alcohol, and smoking abuse. Jose wasn't used to drink or smoke. Spermogram, genetic tests, physical examination, trying to find a reason for the baby not to come. No physical cause was found. The doctors then instructed the couple to seek psychological help. Psychological? Most likely, the eagerness to fulfill her motherhood dream was negatively influencing Maria, so she was unable to get pregnant. Psychological help was not covered by the medical insurance, so it was left aside until they had economic conditions. The St. Anthony Tresena began, 13 in total. In the center, they able to eliminate any negative influence that was preventing her from fulfilling the dream. But it was when she took the little boat to the great mother Iemanjá with those mother of saint wise words that she could feel a little relief in her heart. She was barefoot in the sand, watching the blue of the sea embracing the horizon, fluid with the magic of the infinite, when she heard, "My daughter, give time to time. Everything has the right time to happen." Maria herself tried to stop thinking about motherhood, now with the hope that someday her dream would come true. She began to dedicate herself with more emphasis to her own professional life. When she applied for team leader, she discovered a new word which kept her mind occupied with market studies and courses that allowed her to delve into the available data and better understand the human material she would work with. She got the promotion. She discovered that was wrong to imagine that working with baby products would mean to be in charge of a basically female team. She had to dedicate herself a lot to earn her team respect, where she was the only woman. But with dedication and increasingly positive results, she was achieving the much desired respect. She continued to accompany her husband in sports activities, which were limited to soccer, and of course the barbecue after the game. The game itself, of course, did not deserve special attention from her, but the barbecue was an opportunity of getting to know other families better, exchanging ideas, making new friends. When she started to accompany Jose to soccer, she imagined to have the opportunity to participate in discussions about the country's political and social situation. Nothing further from reality. Conversations and discussions were limited to matters without depth, the personal lives of famous people, what was happening at Bibi. But they was worth as moments of relaxation, and she was trying to make the most of them. At least there, nobody was asking when the baby would come. When Mariana, the daughter of her only sister Estela, was born, joy flooded the family. She was a very loving and healthy baby. The great friendship uniting the sisters made the couple be elected to baptize this little gem. The good mother, with total dedication, spent Mariana's early years without even remembering her personal dream. Her surrender was complete to her beloved godchild. Evidently, her surrender was translated into worship. She was adored by Mariana. Time passed on, and the urge to be a mother was being forgotten. The depression was gone. She wasn't thinking about that anymore. After all, 10 years had been passed. She was believing that could never be a mother. As always, she was speaking very little and still less about motherhood. All childless couples used to complain that family members and friends have a habit of almost demanding an explanation of why they don't have children yet. Maria, when in this situation, used to joke and say that she welcomed the Fifth Amendment. Is it possible? So, is that the only goal? But she started thinking about adoption. Part 2. Why did you buy the weapon?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
It was a miracle. After so long, when she already believed to be doomed to forget motherhood, when the decision to adopt a child was already mattering, the pregnancy arrived. Maria and Jose weren't never so happy. Of course, family and friends always had something to say. Late pregnancy can be dangerous. What will you do now about work? Maria was just smiling and avoiding answering. After all, she had waited calmly and would not allow the shadow of uncertainty to rob such joy. The pregnancy went on without the slightest problem. Not even nauseas were felt. Even once, the visit to the obstetrician, a very careful antenatal, but no unnecessary worries. As soon as she had the confirmation, she created the group Welcome Baby on WhatsApp so that everyone, family and closest friends, could follow, even from a distance, the joy she and her husband were feeling. The first message sent was the ultrasound little picture to be updated each month. Now, a new advice tool had been created. Better not buy the baby late until the 5th month of pregnancy. Better not preparing the baby's room until to know if it's a boy or a girl. Watch out for fright. Stop drinking coffee. You can't eat raw meat. The mother has to eat very well. The mother cannot put on weight. Maria used to smile when receiving these messages and to abstain herself from discussions. For sure, she used to pay attention to the advice, mainly those from her mother and those from Stella, trying to be logical in her decisions. It seemed that she was taking the ideal steps since the pregnancy continued without problems. She had accumulated vacations and would use them after birth. She would continue to work until birth, since she was feeling phenomenal. Evidently, the last 2 months had been used to train a substitute, the boss's brother, with a temporary contract, who would stay during her absence. Alberto was extremely friendly, very dedicated, and from the beginning he proved to be very intelligent and had an incredible adaptive power. Maria dedicated herself to training because she wanted the company not to suffer from her absence. After all, it would be 5 months between maternity license and accumulated vacation. Everything went perfectly. It seemed that the baby had its own calendar and that the universe was just obeying. The big day came, a Friday. At 6 o'clock in the morning, she felt the first contractions, and Jose took her to the hospital without delay. Her medical insurance was one of the best, and Maria would have almost personalized care. Her doctor was immediately called, and the whole team as well, and without delay, she was given analgesia in order to avoid those unbearable pains. It worked. The baby birth had took only 20 minutes. The doctor put Estela over her mother, and Maria felt as if all the happiness in the world had girded her up. Weeping could not be contained, and she raped the baby with all her love and many kisses. In the room, Maria was very happy with the possibility of having the whole family visiting the baby, as it would be a weekend. Daddy tried to give the news to everyone, co-workers, the family, and as soon as he could enter, embrace her, showing his great love and joy. Jose stayed by her side, watching over and pampering her during all night. In the morning, the nurse brought Stella and gave them all the guidance that the parents would need to care for the newborn. The first attempt to breastfeed that curly little angel was frustrating. She just was wanting to sleep. The first to arrive was the future godmother, the beloved sister and friend Stella. She couldn't stay long because she managed to get in with Mariana in order for her to know her little cousin. Someone could notice that the little girl, only 4 years old, was there, and it wasn't allowed. But the godmother was exultant, as the angel would also be named Stella, a tribute that resulted in an immense euphoria. She said goodbye with lots of kisses and started the activities that had been already planned, but that would be now performed with much more joy being possible. She would go to Maria's home to clean and tidy it up, giving special attention to the baby's room, washing and ironing all the baby laid, in short, organizing everything for the arrival of the curly little angel. Then all the family members were present, in pairs, as they were demanding at the reception. Much joy, many gifts, the flowers' varied colors, the sunlight entering through the windows, giving form to happiness, that sunflower, as already said by the poet. Part 3. What about the screams?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
It was time to go back to work, and everything was organized for that. The godmother would take care of Stella so that her mother could work, since she had left work when Mariana was born. Maria went to the company on her first day of work, feeling immense stress due to the doubt of being able to return to her role as team leader, since she was aware that her substitute could supplant her without any problem. But it looked like the medical factory was open, and she found out that her old boss had been promoted. Her substitute would now be her new boss, and she was back to her previous role. Maria and Jose's first trip after that was to the beach, taking Stella for the Great Mother Iemanjá to know her and also to thank so many received blessings. A few years of happiness followed, the cousins growing up as if they were sisters. The small age difference, as the years went by, wasn't being felt. Despite never coinciding in the same class, they were always attending the same school, and Mariana was there, protecting little Stella as if being her older sister. Doubts felt by little Stella were ever elucidated by Mariana, being them mathematic operations or how to act in different situations. Facing difficulties, the little girl ever was coming to her cousin for this solution. But when Joanna and Luisa became Stella's best friends, a distance was created between the cousins, never admitted before. Mariana didn't like her new cousin's friend's behavior and tried to alert her about the dangers that such friendships could mean. However, at the age of 14, an unjustified and incoherent revolt was becoming more and more evident inside Stella. When she started smoking, Mariana talked to her a lot, but helped hide the fact from the rest of the family in the hope to be able to convince her to quit the addiction. At school, it was being commented that both Joanna and Luisa were using marijuana, and the board started to observe that figure who, from time to time, was at the front gate talking to the girls. He wasn't a student, nor known by the teaching staff and the students. The ones seen talking to him at the gate never confirmed to know him, nor to know his name. The board reported this suspicious attitude of invasion at the door of the school, and the police began to be present at entrance and exit times in an attempt to identify and verify the guy's intentions. As if by magic, he quit breathing. Mariana kept advising the already not so little Stella, but now their conversations invariably were ending in discussions. Stella used to fight her cousin's advice with an elaborate dialectic, and to attack her with philosophical phrases, almost convincing her that she was harassing her friends out of pure prejudice. They all lived in Morumbi, but their friends in Paraisopolis, and it was said that they knew and even maintained a friendly relationship with those responsible for the distribution. Stella then began to try to convince her cousin, describing the social injustice that the favela residents even suffered, including her friends holding the banner of the social injustice. She used to say that the drug trade was the only possible way out for the oppressed youth having to live in poverty. Mariana was feeling helpless in the face of so many made sentences, so many examples taken from sociology books, so many arguments. Without a doubt, Estela was very intelligent and had the gift of speech. It was very difficult to convince her, mainly because Mariana couldn't understand her inexplicable revolt depth. Both Maria and her sister were unaware of the battle that was going on within the family. Stella was 14 and Mariana was 18. They were already young and the mothers were calm, since they always went out together, always protected each other. When Stella started skipping classes to spend some time with her friends, Mariana threatened to tell her family, but she didn't get the expected result. Classes continued to be skipped by Stella, who wasn't giving further explanations about her whereabouts. Mariana then found herself in a limit situation at a crossroads. She had been covering up her cousin in an attempt to convince her that wasn't acting correctly, hoping to resolving the matter without causing problems for the family, without success. If telling at home what was going on should betray the trust of the only cousin who she loved as a sister and best friend. She thought a lot and was determined. She would tell. Too late. Part 4. Can you explain the gun at hand?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Mariana was already worried about Stella's delay. They had to go home together, so she had to wait for her to come back, wherever she was. Furthermore, she was going to communicate the cousin her decision to tell the family what was happening. She had never been so late. When Stella arrived, there was no one at school already. The gates had been already closed, and Mariana was desperate when she arrived, in tears. A few minutes passed on before Stella could speak to tell her cousin the reason for her despair. During last month, the friends, when skipping classes, were going to Joanna's house to have fun. They were doing nothing wrong. They were listening to funk, dancing, talking a lot, in short, enjoying their age. Josivaldo, Joanna's brother, was one of the traders that Stella defended so much, and with that, they had merchandise at their disposal without worrying about where it came from or how much it cost. He, from the first moment, had showed a great interest in Stella. He was a very polite boy, and he treated her very kindly. He started to attend the meetings, and Stella was rocked by her new friend. She was willing to fight for her new love, no matter that he was the result of social injustice. He had stopped studying before finishing high school due to same injustice. Then he didn't get a job, and the few jobs he could get almost were meaning slavery, working hard for a ridiculous wage. For this reason, he was forced to enter the trade. There he was much respected. Anyway, he was very smart, and Stella spent a lot of time talking to him. His worldview enchanted her. That day, while they were having fun and dancing, 3 guys came in suddenly, whom she had never seen. Josivaldo knew them, as he proved to be very afraid of them. He quickly headed for Norberto, telling him chief and apologizing for something that Stella didn't quite understand. Norberto and Josivaldo talked for a while, or better saying, Norberto was talking and Josivaldo listening with his head down. Phrases like, "You're telling me," or "You already know what to do," reached Stella's ears. Seated on the sofa along with her friends. That's when she heard, "Who is this cat?" That horror has reached her heart. Her beauty had touched the soul of that being, which she would later discover and also say consisted on the incarnation of coldness and evil. "It's my cat," she heard Josivaldo replying. "It's my cat," she wanted to reply, to say that she wasn't an object that belonged to someone, but Joanna managed her not to respond. Now Norberto and the two henchmen were interested on her. She felt as if being stripped by their gaze, not only her body, but also her soul. Josivaldo was keeping his head down while Norberto was repeating to him over and over again that he already knew the law. What law was he speaking about? A few minutes of negotiation, which seemed like hours, without making it very clear for Estela what they were negotiating, just being clear that Josivaldo was continuing to refuse. When Norberto said, "I'm trying to save you," even though being she already owed, "but as you want, no business, that's the law." Then he added, "Just know that she will be mine. You already know it," and slaughtered Josivaldo without further ado with a shot to the head. The fear didn't allow Estela to move. She couldn't even cry as her friends did. She never knew how the police had been notified, but the siren started to approach. Norberto and his henchmen ran, but not before to say to Estela, "Now you are mine. I'll be back to get you." She felt to be pulled by her friends and without realizing it was already out of the house, running to hide, as if she had pulled the trigger. Joanna and Luisa kept telling her not to say anything, not to comment on what happened to anyone, that it would be better for her and for everyone. How could it be better for everyone if she shut up? A heinous crime had been just committed, and she had been a witness. But when Joanna told her she was blamed, she couldn't believe it. What? They waited for some time inside one of the neighboring houses, but when the police started to come up and the killer searching, Stella ran to the school, being very careful not to be seen. With other neighbors' help, she went from one shack to another, hiding, afraid of being seen by the police, as if she herself was being wanted. Now, with Mariana's support, she was recovering, but dread of Norberto returned. What about refunding her? The cousins went home and had told to the family everything that had happened. The mother's weeping was what hurt most in the soul. The next day, they decided not to go to school, all of them following the news very carefully. Norberto had been captured, along with the two accomplices, but they couldn't be kept in prison any longer as there were no witnesses. The police had recognized them for fleeing the crime scene, so they'd been arrested. But without a witness, they wouldn't be in prison for more than 24 hours, since they didn't carry weapons. The weapons had been disappeared. That was when Stella decided that she would go to the police to tell everything. Part 5. When and how had you shot?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Mariana didn't agree, as she was feeling it very dangerous for Stella. Declaring as a witness against the boss would certainly turn her a target, if she didn't was already. But she was counting on Stella's friends not to let her identity be known. After all, they used to live inside the law of silence. They would also know how to be silent to protect their friend. But Stella was determined and made use once again of her dialectic, of many made phrases, all of them sociological truth. The family tried to convince her not to allow her philosophy to win until she'd mentioned the psalm. Even though I walk through the darkness valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Mariana was surprised, as she knew that religion wasn't a concern for her cousin, but to convince the others of her convictions. Anyway, the psalm seemed to have convinced them. Finally, she had no say. The family nodded, and they went to the police station. Maria and Jose entered together with Estela. Mariana was later called to declare, but as she hadn't been a witness to the incident, she was released. Her name wouldn't appear. The chief himself tried to guide the family saying how dangerous could be to testify against Norberto, very much known there. They must go unnoticed, and if possible, move on until the trial to take place. The police would try to protect Estela, but nothing could be guaranteed due to the lack of personnel. Norberto and his henchmen were arrested and stay awaiting trial. But it could take years. Neither Estela nor Mariana returned to school. The fear of being identified by the gang spoke louder, and they stayed at home, hidden, as if they were the criminals. On the second day of closing, Luis, a friend of Mariana, came with a note from Luisa. In the note, the friend made clear that after reading it, they should tear it up, that if asked by someone, they should never tell that she had warned them. She also made clear that she would never testify. However, Norberto had put a price on Estela's hurt. She was supposed to hide very well, because they were trying to find her whereabouts, and it would mean death for sure. There was no danger for the rest of the family, because Norberto wanted them to suffer, but due to the death of the one who had dared to act against him. He gave orders that no one in the family besides her should be eliminated, since he wanted to delight in their suffering for the loss of their loved one and for the regret for having supported her decision to declare. Norberto wanted to set an example for everyone that the law of silence had to be respected. Desperation took hold the whole family. Estela was forbidden to leave the house. She shouldn't even look out the window. Her complaints about the situation, which in tears she was screaming not to be fair, still worsened others' mood. Until Mariana decided to talk seriously with her cousin. The affection and the great friendship that were united them would make that, at last, Stella could hear her. At least she had to try it. She began to speak with the tenderness of an older sister, who, more than trying to be a model for the little one, helps her to adopt her own model, understanding that her needs may be different. Stella, do you remember how many times we were right here in this room talking until dawn? When you were telling me about all your doubts, asking about everything? Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy. It was exciting for me to tell you the stories of Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, all those stories that I already knew, because I was older than you. Then I started to feel very important when you wanted to know about boyfriends, the first kiss, what one feels if falling in love? Do you remember the scare you got when your first period came? I felt powerful because I knew what it was, and I could explain you what was going on. As you were growing up, doubts were changing, also growing up. I know that at this point you aren't asking me, but I feel the need to clarify something very important to you. Stella, you grew up, but you haven't matured. Stella tried to reply, but Mariana imposed herself and continued. Let me talk. You need to understand that what is happening is the result of your own choices. I mean, if you don't want to hear the advice of those who love you and want to protect you, if you want to make your own mistakes, you can complain about the results and try to throw the problems on others. This means mattering. Of course, the family will always help you to solve the problems, even if they had been caused solely by your choices. But that requires a lot of abnegation. The whole family is suffering, and you to be making sense because you can't even be at the window only makes the situation worse. It only increases the suffering of others. The first you have to do is to matter and analyze where you went wrong, so you avoid making same mistakes in the future. You have to know that there is a solution for everything, and we will help you find it. But stop manipulating everyone with your wishes, your decisions, and then crying when the result is not what you want. Look at your mother. She aged 10 years in one day. My godmother doesn't deserve any of this, nor does anyone else in the family. So stop. Stop now. Stop feeling a victim and start making more conscious decisions in your life. The first must be to accept that for every action there is a reaction. That is, everything has consequences for people's lives, and they are not always deserved, but they are almost always generated by your own decisions. Get some sleep and rest. Tonight, we will all talk together and we will find a solution for this situation. Be calm. Everything will be solved. Part 6. Describe the invader.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
All of them had attended the meeting, all the family. Also, Aunt Jurema would be connected via Skype. Stella began to feel a very strange sensation, a kind of internal struggle. They had placed her right in the middle of the room where everyone could look at her. She could feel inside her soul what everyone thought of her and of the situation she had generated for her family. Yes, she knew that her own decisions had dragged them there. Mom and Dad were on her right side, sitting on the couch. When Mom approached to settle down, Stella observed that she was looking much older. Her eyes were wide for crying, but she still was showing the same sweetness in her eyes, the same love she ever gave her. That was anyone's guess. It always has been. Stella, since she was little, was sure that his intention was always to defend and protect his wife, that between she and his daughter would always elect his wife. Would that be jealousy? To her left was Mariana. She knew that any decision by the cousin would always be to protect her, to help her. She had this certainty in her heart. Grandma was in the armchair, directly opposite with Uncle Polo, Mariana's father, and her godmother, each in a chair, each to one side. There were some silence moments, which Stella didn't understand very well. Nobody was going to say anything. Wasn't the meeting going to start? She was already prepared for all kinds of criticism. She could take it quietly. Then, Aunt Jurema connected. She was Mom's cousin. At a very young age, she had decided to move to the United States. She knew that her first years in that country had been very difficult. The family, from time to time, commented that her first job there had been dancer, but whenever Stella asked for details, the subject was avoided. From the photos, Stella was ever marveled at her aunt. She was a very beautiful brunette and was always very elegant. Aunt Jurema started the conversation by answering the questions that rained from each one. She was living in Florida now that she was married. Her American husband was a very nice person. They had a stable economic situation, but she continued to work. At the moment, she kept only one job because even before the wedding, she kept 3. Someone asked what time she could sleep, having 3 jobs, and she replied very kindly, "This is the country of opportunities, but if you want to live well, you can't be afraid to work hard. Here, people always have more than one job, especially those who came from abroad who have to remain completely alone. Leisure is for later, when you already have a home, economic stability." Stella was astonished with the others, asking Aunt Jurema so many intimate questions. They were getting into her life, and Estela was surprised. But then the aunt wanted to know all the details of the problems they were facing. It was when Jurema wanted to speak directly to Stella, asking a lot of unpleasant questions, such as, "Since when were you using marijuana? Did you have sex with Josivaldo? Who else did you have contact with in the slum? Why did you decide to be a witness against the drug lord?" Stella tried at first to escape, to disguise the answers, not being very clear. But Aunt Jurema was very intelligent. She didn't allow it. She had to answer with sincerity until she discovered that she, herself, could not answer why she had decided to be a witness. All those made phrases that had convinced the family that it was a good option, now that she was suffering in the flesh the results, now that she knew the danger she was going through, no longer were convincing even herself. Then Aunt Jurema continued, "My girl, if you had lied to me, I wouldn't help you. But I know very well that some of the decisions we take are not the most appropriate, as they take us on paths we did not want to take. However, it is necessary to understand that people's lives are a consequence of these decisions. The statement, 'making mistakes is human,' is true, but persisting in mistakes means being an idiot is even more true." Stella was amazed to see how Aunt Jurema and Mariana looked like. Not physically, although the two were very beautiful brunettes, but in the way of thinking. She paid attention to her aunt, and hope returned to her heart, returned to that family. "You know that I now have another surname. I moved to another state. Besides, my contact with the family has always been with my mother. Few people in Brazil know about my existence. I'm sending you and Mariana an air ticket. I will take care of you both to end this hell. You will no longer be communicating with anyone by phone. All communication with the family will be through my Skype. Mariana, I know that in theory you aren't in danger, but I want to take advantage of this situation because I believe that this coming may be important for your future. Besides, I know that you're very mature and that you're friends. I will count on your help. But you decide if you want to come. Unnecessary to say, no friend has to know where you are. In the future, when the guy is judged, if you, Stella, are convinced to testify, your parents can warn you and you can decide whether to testify or if you decline of it. If you keep yourself silent. Part 7. What persecution?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
The meeting ended with the certainty that the best solution had been found. Mariana decided that yes, it would be an excellent opportunity in her life, and also because she wanted to stay with her cousin, she would go. After all, it would be a great adventure. They looked for passports, which had been issued when thinking to take them to Disneyland, and were, in effect. Tickets arrived over the internet the next morning. They had exactly 3 hours to prepare their luggage and get to the airport. Aunt Jurema was really brilliant. It was a rush. Everyone was euphoric, and much more the cousins. Only Paolo would go to the airport, so the neighbors would not notice the movement in the house. They could be careful enough. The farewell was very emotional. Many tears were shed, but these were no longer of despair. On the contrary, they were of hope. At the airport, Paolo also wept as saying goodbye to his daughter and niece. But his tears were also for trusting that the current suffocation was being resolved. When boarding, the cousins felt an unprecedented joy and relief that fell deep in their souls. Stella observed every detail of the steward's uniform. It was very elegant. When a child, she always was saying that would be a flight attendant when growing up. She wasn't understanding a word of what was being said to her, since she didn't speak English. So she kept watching Mariana, imitating her reactions, since the cousin, although far from being considered fluent, was able to communicate and understand the guidelines. She sat down, fastened belt, closed her eyes, and immediately began to imagine the great adventure they were starting. She would meet a lot of people, making many friends, going on many walks. She knew that in Florida, even in winter, the temperatures were great. Snow in that state was rare. The last snowfall had been in 2018, after 30 years without snow. A YouTuber she used to watch had given all these explanations, had shot many people, many beaches, and ended by saying that Florida is called the state of the sun. Yes, it would be a great adventure. She opened her eyes to see the takeoff. She showed the data shown on the little television with great interest. She looked at Mariana, who was showing same curiosity, put on the headset, and looked for a film in Portuguese. She wasn't paying much attention to the film because from time to time the scene of Josivaldo being killed was coming to her mind. Her friends sit down without being able to defend themselves, her discussions with Mariana, the long conversations with her cousin when she wanted to know about the first kiss, Norberto and his sudden interest in her. It was like a great storm of scenes that were disturbing that peace, and during seconds had made her doubt that she was already safe. She closed her eyes again and tried to rest, convincing herself that there was nothing to fear. She woke up from her nap when the dinner cart was passing. That friendly fly attendant asked her if she would prefer chicken or meatballs. She decided on chicken. She prepared to eat as if a ritual was, everything accommodated carefully, strategically placed. The tray, the bread, the cutlery, the napkin, and she started to eat. The first mouthful was a disappointment. That sauce tasted very strange. The smell was unbearable. She couldn't define the seasoning, but she was very hungry, so tried to keep eating. The second mouthful she thought not to be able to swallow. She got. But she no longer insisted. She would eat the bread, the salad, and hopefully later they would bring something more edible. How could Mariana be eating? That was awful. After a few hours of sleep, coffee was served. It was not abundant, but enough to hide the hunger she was feeling. She was a little disappointed with the food, but thought that the kindness shown by the staff on board made up for the dissatisfaction with the served food. Landing in Miami was announced. How exciting! Part 8. Why did you get married?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Jurema was waiting for them at the airport. It was very exciting. Jurema was crying. Estela thought it was a bit exaggerated, since they had recently spoken and seen one another on Skype, but she didn't deny long hugs. In the car, she told them that she wasn't living in Miami, but yes, in Fort Lauderdale, that they were very close. They would take a tour on Miami so that they could at least see why this city, called the capital of the sun, was considered a paradise of beaches and shopping. They would have time to know the parties later. They visited the main points of the city without getting out of the car and parked at Aventura Mall, the largest shopping mall in the region, and according to her aunt, loved by Brazilian people. They visited several stores and had lunch at Johnny Rockets. Mariana and Estela were stunned by what they saw. Everything seemed huge. They were surprised to hear so many Brazilians talking. Would they be tourists? On the way to Fort Lauderdale, Aunt Jurema explained that she had contacted several friends, and both Mariana and Estela already were employed. Mariana, as she already had a driver's license, would work for a family with 2 children, taking care of them, accompanying the children wherever they had to go, including taking them to school. It wouldn't be difficult, since one of the children was 8 and the other was 10. She would sleep at the house, having schedules that would allow her to go to an English school for foreigners. Aunt Jurema knew them because she had been working with them when the children were younger. Mariana felt sick in the stomach because she had no experience in caring for children or driving. At the same time, she was very happy with the possibility of studying English and decided that she would face the challenge carefully but with a lot of dedication. Stella, being younger, would live in Aunt Jurema's house and would work in a small Brazilian restaurant, which was very close to the house. She could go there walking, work in the kitchen while her English was insufficient, but later she could even to serve the tables. She would also have time to go to an English school. On the way home, they continued to admire the place immensely. I-95 with a heavy traffic, but everyone keeping the allowed speed, and it was very well maintained and indicated. They continued admiring when entering Fort Lauderdale. Everything was miles away, huge stars taking a block each, and Aunt Jurema made a kind of a recognition of the city known as America's Venice. Without getting out of the car, they passed through downtown, where the Museum of Art, bars, restaurants, and nightclubs are located. She also showed where the Sawgrass Mills was, and they went down a few minutes to see the Hollywood Beach Boardwalk with its popular Margaritaville. Without delay, they returned to the way home, not without Aunt Jurema adding, "This way, you can go to the Everglades National Park. One of these days, we are going to visit it. You also have to know flamingo gardens, but all in good time. Along the way, lots of trees, grass, and space between one house and the other. It looked like a beautiful country town. At home, the dazzle session continued. It looked like they were in a movie. The house was huge, although it didn't look like it on the outside. The living room, with a huge sofa and two armchairs with a floral print, separated from a super kitchen by an island, with space and high stools so that everyone could sit down and have their meals. Along the wall was a counter. Next to the huge window were all the appliances were, the most modern imaginable. Double refrigerator, microwave, cooker maker, toaster, in short, everything you need. And everything had its own place, very organized and very clean. Aunt Jurema showed them where they would stay. A bedroom with two single beds and two desks. Very simple, but very nice and tidy. When opening the door that was next to the beds, the big surprise. On the right, a bedroom just for them with a shower. On the left, a huge closet with enough space for the cousins to organize their clothes. Dinner was already prepared, and Aunt Jurema suggested them to take a shower and get ready, that John would be home soon from work and they all would have dinner together. They took long showers, as if trying to eliminate with the water that was going down the rain any and all concerns they might have. When both appeared, already remade, they met John, although only Mariana could communicate a little with him. He only spoke English. Anyway, he was very nice, and they were aware that he would be an excellent person, since he had agreed to help them. Dinner was almost a party. When going to bed, the cousins were exhausted, physically and psychologically, with so much news. Aunt Jurema was undoubtedly an angel. It was clear that she had excellent friendships, since in such a short time she had the solution to their problems. Furthermore, they were grateful that at no time had she mentioned the matter that had given rise to the escape. Part 9. When did you meet the victim?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
The following day, Sunday, Aunt Jurema allowed them to sleep late, worried that they would recover from jet lag. It was already noon when they got up. Breakfast was prepared. A real American breakfast, which for the cousins looked like lunch. Then they would all go to the Hollywood beach. They would spend Sunday there. To Mariana's surprise, Aunt Jurema handed her the car keys, saying that she had no time to lose, that she should get used to the automatic car and the local traffic. Throughout the route, directions, details about traffic laws, some different from what she was used to, like the stop on both sides of the intersection. Both cars were forced to stop. She thanked not to meet another car at any of these intersections. Who should go ahead if the stop was there for both of them? But the most unexpected was that Mariana was perfect, nor did she believe it herself. No problem, as the speed limits were very clear. The directions were present at every corner. It was all a matter of logic. They parked and walked to the beach. Mariana commented that although Hollywood Beach is much more extensive, the sand and water temperature reminded her of a trip to Fernando de Noronha. For a few seconds, she realized the distance between her and her parents and felt a squeeze in her heart. She looked at Stella, as if trying to find out if she also was feeling her heart tied by nostalgia. No way. Unless the cousin had learned to pretend very well, she was not sad. Quite the opposite. Stella was smiling and observing everything around her. At one point, she stayed for a few minutes with her eyes closed. When Mariana asked her if she was all right, she replied to be only trying to observe the sunlight and warmth. Yes, she was fine. Soon, the cousins were commenting on the dress of the people who passed by the promenade. Stella was admired from the elegance of the women. Some were dressed for sport with a cap, appropriate and expensive sneakers, shorts, or sweatpants, mostly Adidas and Nike. It looked like a fitness fashion show. Others dressed for a fancy walk with a hat, the silk fluttered by the sea breeze. They looked like models from a Paris parade. People dressed just to walk the dog also passed by. These ones seemed more normal to the cousins. After around 3 hours, Aunt Jurema suggested to take a coffee in one of the bars on the promenade. The suggestion, of course, was very welcome. They settled at one of the outside tables, as they didn't want to lose anything that would pass by. The bar was almost full. Stella complained about the coffee, saying it looked like potatoes water. When she stopped, watching that man who came in with a gal and who occupied the only table that was still available. They were very close, but it was impossible to hear what they were talking about. The man was very similar to Neil Diamond. Stella almost got up to ask for an autograph, but held on. She didn't want to go through any shame if it wasn't him. She preferred to observe that girl who was accompanying him. She should have been Stella's age, and was one of those who looked parade Paris, wearing that wonderful hat with a scarf matching the silk dress. Coffee was no longer important. She took it, sip by sip, very slowly, while watching the couple. They were talking a lot, laughing a lot, but even observing every detail, every movement, there were no indications that they could be lovers. Meanwhile, Mariana, Androrema, and John were talking, but Estella wasn't paying attention. She was looking like not to be there. On the way home, the aunt arranged that the next day she would accompany Mariana to the house where she was going to work. She would stay there until lunchtime, so Mariana could meet the family and she could help if any doubt arose. When getting home, she would have lunch with Stella, and they would go together to the restaurant where she would be working. It was very close to home. She knew the owners and all the people working there. They were very nice people. Part 10. Who is Marisol Fernandez's daughter to you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Again, the sick in the stomach took over Mariana. On the way, she was trying to observe every detail, every curve, every tree, feeling a strange sensation as if she was going to jail. When they arrived, Mariana couldn't help herself and asked, "Is it here?" Androrema smiled and rang the bell. It was a mansion, one of those that the girl had only seen in movies. A huge and beautiful garden at the entrance. Certainly, even a swimming pool should have. Lucy opened the door without delay with a huge smile. Mariana soon learned that she was the housekeeper, as she wore a uniform. Lucy and Androrema greeted each other with a hug, like two friends who had not seen each other for some time. They were invited in, and the girl's amazement didn't stop. An immense golden staircase and doors that did not allow to reveal the secrets that surely hid. They went to a little room next to the kitchen. It was small, but very pleasant. In a few minutes, that kind-looking, very elegant lady arrived. She looked dressed for a fashion show. She thought she would be the owner of the house, but Aunt Jurema explained that she was the children's grandmother. In a nutshell, Aunt Jurema explained that their mother died of a massive heart attack. The husband, a surgeon, wasn't at home when it happened, and even now, after 6 months, he wasn't forgiven by himself not to be beside his wife on that moment. He was at work because he used to work 18 hours a day, and for that he blamed himself. Perhaps he could have prevented the outcome if he had been there. The ambulance took only 13 minutes to arrive, but they were unable to revive the young mother. The police couldn't believe that such a young woman could have been wiped out by a heart attack and opened an investigation. He was a doctor. How could this have happened? It certainly had somehow caused the death of his wife. Furthermore, he was acting as guilty. The investigation came to nothing. Natural causes had been declared, and the police, after no evidence that contradicted the report, had accepted. Jane, that elegant and caring lady, was the doctor's mother. She lived in California, but stayed there ever since to help his son with everything, to take care of her grandchildren. But after so long, a decision had to be made. She was needing to go home, and if she couldn't find someone she could trust to take care of her grandchildren, she would take them with her, since her son has hidden his pain at work. Now, many nights he didn't return from the hospital where he worked. It seemed that he no longer slept. Anyway, despite worrying about her son, she was aware that he was an adult, and being he a doctor, he had friends and psychologists at his disposal when prepared to abandon the feeling of victim of fate. The grandmother's concern was mainly for her grandchildren. She would be together with Mariana, watching her attitudes, studying ever she had been a good choice, and above all, observing if she would be nice enough for the children for at least 2 months. Soon the children had arrived. Kelly, 8 years old, and Jonathan, 10 years old. The children would not go to school that day, so they could meet Mariana, since their acceptance was essential. What she felt when meeting them, when looking into their eyes, she could never describe. An immense sadness. She felt that so much sadness wasn't possible in such small children. Jonathan greeted her, shouted to be much polite, but Kelly just smiled. It was a sad but sweet smile. She soon discovered that Kelly was attending daily sessions with a psychologist, as since her mother's death she hadn't spoke again. With the grandmother's consent, she would stay and a 2 months experiment would be done with her accompaniment. Audiobook had to go. It was almost noon. Lucy then took her to see the rest of the house and showed her the room she would be staying in, with Kelly's room on the right and Jonathan's on the left side. The house no longer seemed so sensational. Now she could feel the great sadness contained within those walls. She thought it could be compared to a golden cage where a bird can die of anguish. Part 11. Write your addresses in this country.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the 50th Amendment.
Audiobook hurried back. It had been longer than she expected. When she got home, Estela was ready, well dressed and made up, to make a good impression on her first job. She was thrilled and hopeful about the future ahead. They had lunch together, organized the kitchen, rested for a while, and walked to the restaurant. Stella thought it wasn't as close as she had been told, since they had to walk 20 minutes. But in that place, everything was miles away, and if it was analyzed again with the place vision, it could be considered close. Along the way, Audiobook explained a little of what was awaiting her. The restaurant owners have been friends since her moving to Fort Lauderdale. She had been working there for 6 months, while she found nothing paying better, and then she'd changed jobs. Employment in that country didn't have the same binding background as in Brazil. Workers, like employers, didn't feel bound by the law. At any time, the employer could fire you without further ado. But the other side of the coin was that the employee could also, at any time, warn not to show up the next day. Of course, Audiobook had warned them in advance, even though not to be an obligation defined by law. She waited for them to get a replacement to leave them. In her life, she had long defined that, in addition to the legal, ethics and consideration had to be respected. Maybe that's why now she had the facility to be able to put her niece so quickly in a job. When they arrived, lunchtime was over, and there were only 2 tables that were still occupied. They'd sat and waited for the owners to come and talk. An American coffee was served to them. While Stella wondered if she would say how much she hated American coffee, she looked around and became surprised. On one of the tables were that man, similar to Neil Diamond, and that girl from the beach. Was it destiny? The young woman now wasn't wearing a hat, and she could see her features. She was very beautiful and well made up. There was no exaggeration in her makeup. It just enhanced her natural beauty. The long hair pinned to frame her square face. Both were talking and laughing a lot. She was so absorbed in the analysis that was making of the girl that she had difficulties in hiding the startle when the restaurant owners approached and sat down with them. They were Brazilian, but being in the country for so long, they already spoke Portuguese with an accent. Stella thought it was neglect. How could they speak Portuguese as foreigners? But thinking about the difficulties she would face not speaking English, she was grateful to be able to work with anyone who could understand her and that she could also, at least until she would learn the new language. She was taken to the kitchen, where she would be for the next few months, working as an assistant. She was amazed at the amount of dishes, but then she could see that there was a machine and became calmed down. Leila, the cook, didn't speak Portuguese. They probably wouldn't talk much, at least for now. She would take a few days to realize that, despite not speaking, she understood everything that was said. She was the daughter of a Brazilian mother and a North American father, and her mother had always given more importance to her speaking English than Portuguese. She used to say that it was essential to speak the local language without an accent in order not to be treated as a foreigner. Stella didn't understand this statement very well. She would wait to be able to communicate directly with Leila so that she could explain what was hidden behind it. In Brazil, foreigners were very well regarded, and for the most part, the best jobs were theirs. It would take some time to understand Leila's mother's vision. Anyway, her time of entry would be at 10 a.m. and would be there until 4 p.m. every day, including Sundays. She thought that this was similar to slavery, but Jurema had already warned that in that country, anyone who wanted a future would have to work hard. She would wait for English classes, dedicate herself to speaking and understanding it as well as possible, and then would think about the future. She went out to the salon, hoping to see the man, but he had gone. Jurema realized that there was something strange about the astonishment Stella showed when she left the kitchen, but she didn't understand what was happening. Stella would start the next day, certainly because of the insecurity of facing her first job far from the rest of the family, doubts about the future. Part 12. Were you working illegally?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
It seemed like a lie, but the 2 months had passed on and everything was perfect. So, Jane came home to California with the certainty that Mariana had been an excellent option. She was very intelligent and in a short time had been able to communicate very well in English. Of course, classes while the kids were at school had helped a lot. But what the grandmother was taking most into account to feel so calm was the great involvement she was having with the children. Mariana showed a lot of patience also with Jonathan, but mainly with Kelly, whose needs she had to practically guess since she never spoke. The psychologist also talked for a long time with Mariana in a session where Kelly wasn't. It had been organized by Jane in the second week that Mariana spent with the children. She was a little afraid of what the psychologist might discover, since she saw her almost as an investigator, someone who could expose her deepest secrets. When she left the office, however, she was calm. The doctor had focused on Mariana's reactions to extreme situations, on her patience with the children, and on how much she could dedicate herself so that she never could mean a danger to them. In truth, Mariana didn't know very well how those drawings, exercises, and 3 direct questions had said so much about her. Anyway, she was happy with the result. In the last 30 minutes of the consultation, the psychologist dedicated herself to clarifying Kelly's situation. She explained that the little girl's first symptoms led her to think about schizophrenia, but this report was discarded over time. It wasn't confirmed. They summed up the problem in a way that she could understand when she said that the girl was talking to her mother when she fell dead. The sadness that overtook her when she felt unconsciously that she had somehow been responsible for what happened to her mother made her stop talking. Not speaking, she didn't have to repeat to anyone what had happened. It was as if it hadn't happened. However, all her other senses, all her intelligence was there, intact. She continued to learn, as her activities at school were demonstrating. She continued to eat, watching television, playing with her toys, and participating in her brother's activities, but without saying a word. The doctor explained that when she would feel strong and support enough, she would communicate again, since there was no physical impediment for it to occur. Mariana thought that perhaps the absence of her father, who was totally dedicated to his professional activity, wasn't helping. She thought that he was closing in on the silence too, since he didn't speak of what happened to anyone, and especially with his children. He kept a distance that protected him, avoiding facing his sadness. Basically, he had also closed himself, no longer speaking, at least at home. Not to mention that he almost never was at home. Jonathan, however, showed that he was struggling to get over what had happened. He was very affectionate with his sister, not forgetting to be a child. He loved to play basketball very much, and whenever he had some time, he could be found training on the court next to the pool. In a very short time, Mariana had managed to integrate a routine of obligations and leisure for the children, which was assimilated in such a way that they did not identify the obligations. Everything seemed idle to them. In the morning, she made getting dressed to go to school almost like a party. In front of the rooms, she'd prepared a walkway through which they had to parade under the eyes of the judge, who would decide which one on that day was the most elegant. For breakfast, everyone was allowed to eat only what they liked best, as long as they ate enough to be well fed. In this, too, there was the approval of the feeding technique. Driving to school now included a short tour. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays by the beach. On Tuesdays and Thursdays at Flamingo Gardens. After school, once a week, Kelly was going to the psychologist, who had spaced out visits, even though she wasn't speaking yet. Something related to believing in the Mariana effect as part of the treatment. During consultations, Mariana and Jonathan used to wait patiently at the reception. He always was taking the opportunity to study, while she used to watch the magazines with those so elegant famous. Then the three of them used to go to have an ice cream. Kelly always used to ask chocolate ice cream, while Jonathan was ever trying new flavors. Upon arriving home, school duties were kindly prepared with the supervision of the private teacher. But every day, while Lucy was finishing to prepare dinner, the three used to play basketball. Kelly wasn't interested in the game itself, but she had a lot of fun with this activity with her brother. Shower could never be long, as the schedules were always very controlled, but the children had undoubtedly observed the routine as if it were not a routine. They were happy. Rarely did Dr. Cooper arrive in time for dinner with his children, and when he did, he hardly spoke to them, much less to Mariana. She came to believe that the children's father didn't know who she was. A year had passed, and he had never spoken to her. Mariana always took the opportunity to call on Jurema and Stella after the children went to bed. During her first days at the house, she was calling every day. There was always a lot of news. Over time, she started calling once a week, as Stella was always very tired and the news wasn't so many. Part 13. What about your family?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
A year had passed on, and Estela was feeling more and more nervous. The first days had passed on with much emotion. The work in the kitchen was tedious, but whenever she got the chance, she would take a look at the hall. Every day there was a new face, and Stella was analyzing their clothes, their expressions. She used to imagine each of those people's life, guessing the profession of each one, if they had a lot of money or not, if they were happy in love, if they were members of united families. Finally, she was telling herself the life story of each new face she saw entering. As she improved her English at the adult school and could exchange ideas with Leila, staying inside the kitchen seemed lighter for a while. But she already knew everything about the cook and her family. She started to feel that she needed to talk with more people. If not, she would soon be crazy. She began to help by serving the tables and thought that with that her dissatisfaction would end. In the first days, it worked because she was closer to each one's story. She felt that it could change her own. Besides, she was hoping to see that man again, preferably him to return alone. Maybe that way they could talk. Every night, on returning home, Jurema wanted to know all the details of her day. For a while, Mariana also was calling every night and asking about the details of her day. At first, she was feeling to be cared for, that she could count on the family for whatever came and went. However, at one point, she began to feel that she was being very controlled. Started an isolation process. At home, she avoided talking to her aunt, pretending to watch television programs with the excuse that it was helping her learn the language. When Mariana was calling, she started using the justification that it was too late and she was very tired. With that, she managed not to be so contrite, but she didn't feel any better. In the restaurant, all the faces were already known. New stories for customers could no longer be invented. They all had their own story, of course, created by Estela and to herself, until those girls, beautiful and very elegant, came in. They had dressed extravagantly. Everyone looked at them when they passed between the other tables. Stella made sure to serve their table and tried to guess everything about their life. She thought they should be models. Yes, she could already see them parading the latest best Italian and French designers' creations. They were very funny, talking and laughing non-stop. She was watching their every move, trying to get deeper into the elaboration of their stories in her mind. One of the girls, the one who seemed to be older, noticed her interest and very gently began to talk to her. She asked where Stella was from, how long she had been there, if she had brothers, if her family had also come with her. Without realizing it, Stella was telling about her 10 brothers, about the family living in the slum, about the lack of opportunities she always had to face, and how she was a hero because she overcame of difficulties and went to find a better future with no help. She herself was surprised by her ability to make up such a sad and self-overcoming story. But what she wanted was to find out what they were hiding, because she was sure there was something special about their lives. For a week, they had come every day and hadn't measured spending. They sure had a lot of money. Marisol, the oldest, always was talking to Stella, showing the nice life they led. She told of the trips, the new friendships in each one, how much culture it meant to travel. They were dancers, but the conventional did not go with them, so they dedicated themselves to modern dance, and their performances were made in nightclubs. Much more is gained from modern dance, and tips and nightclubs were significant. In addition, they had the opportunity to meet very wealthy men who didn't save to be able to parade a young and pleasant company. Marisol and her friends stopped coming. They had probably traveled, starting a new adventure. How exciting their lives must be! Good thing she had her cat. She could talk to her by phone. Aunt Jurema was already concerned about Stella's isolation, but the last straw was when she slipped out of the Skype meeting. It had been a month since she had spoken to her parents, having no news from Brazil, and she managed to be isolated in her room, pretending a very bad headache. But every lie requires more lies to support it, and when she came to the living room to watch television, just after the meeting ended, Andrew understood what was happening. Stella was depressed, and something had to be done about it. Her aunt invited her for a walk, as she knew that physical exercise was very important to minimize these disease symptoms. She didn't want to walk, much less with her aunt. Andreema then, as controlling as ever, forced her to see a psychologist. Of course, the psychologist was a friend of hers, since Andreema seemed to know people at all levels of local society. She seemed that having already worked for each and every resident of that city. Stella had to go. After all, she still was living with Aunt Jurema. She had to follow at least some of her directions. At the first consultation, Stella opened her heart, telling everything about her history in Brazil. She told about her childhood in the slum. With each consultation, she was going deeper into the sociological analysis of her history. That her mother had no choice but prostitution after her father had abandoned them. How much the lack of opportunities had led her to become involved in trafficking, since people like her in her history faced prejudice which didn't allow them to escape from that unhealthy environment. The psychologist, after 7 consultations, told her not to be necessary to return, but called her friend Jurema and described unofficially what could be done to help Stella overcome this serious crisis. She commented that the only possibility to overcome the serious traumas that such an unhappy childhood had left would be for her to come to realize that everything had passed, that she now had support and much love from those who still remained as a family, that she should be very patient, give her a lot of attention, and strive to make her realize how much was loved. Jurema understood nothing of what her friend was saying. How? Unhappy childhood? But even without understanding, she thought that as a psychologist, her friend should have obtained information knowing things that she, as an aunt, did not know. When Mariana heard about the results of the consultations, she said nothing. She shut up. Part 14. Why a psychologist?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
The routine was continuing after a year with no problems with the children, as they loved to participate in every moment with Mariana and were excited about each new activity. Dr. David Cooper, by dedicating himself almost exclusively to the profession, had achieved the deserved recognition, being now much known. His picture and work could be seen in all the prestigious medical journals and even in some newspapers. Mariana ever read all the stories to the children every night and separated a shelf where the children arranged the magazines along with the books. That weekend, the father was at home because he was working on something new in the scientific world, a new report that would help in the care of terminally ill people. He told the hospital that he would be at home for 3 days working on the study, that they shouldn't interrupt it, even if there was an earthquake. So he was locked up in the library, isolated from the family, and the children were ordered to behave and not make too much noise. When the doorbell rang, as usual, Lucy answered, already thinking how to get rid of the Jehovah's Witnesses, who for a year had been the only ones to appear at that door. She was terrified when she came across 5 bad-looking men, all armed, one practically loaded, this one all blooded. 2 of them came forward, always pointing the gun at her head, asking for Dr. Cooper. They knew that he lived there, and they wanted to know where he was and whether there were somebody else in the house. Lucy could hardly walk. Her body was trembling, but she took them to the library. One of them has already started walking around the house, checking every room, every corner, to find someone that could be there. He even looked inside the closets, as if someone could be hiding. Mariana and the children were taken to the small room next to the kitchen. They heard that if the doctor did everything right, nothing would happen to them. When Lucy was brought in, they locked the door after checking that there was no phone. Cell phones had been confiscated, and one of them would stand guard outside the door, armed. If someone shouted, they would be eliminated. Dr. Cooper took a few seconds to understand what was going on. He knew the person who was unconscious, bleeding a lot. His photo could be seen almost every day in the newspapers. He was Paul, the drug lord, highly respected in Hialeah. In the past few days, some wounded had been admitted to the hospital. There was a gang war. However, Paul couldn't seek help in any hospital for reasons that were very clear. He would be arrested immediately. That was when Dr. David Cooper realized that he had an admirer. Paul used to follow all his scientific work and had given orders for David to attend him at all costs. An improvised surgery room was prepared in the kitchen. Dr. Cooper extracted 3 bullets. None of them had reached any vital organ, but the loss of so much blood was giving no much hope. Paul's accomplices kept the bullets and warned that the family's life was depending on Paul's survival. Lucy, Mariana, and the children could hear what was said. Then, in a loud voice, quite whispering, Mariana began to tell stories to reassure the children. She chose the ones she knew to be loved by them, whose she was always asked to repeat every night before going to sleep. That's when Kelly approached her, hugged her, and said, "I'm afraid." Mariana, Lucy, and Jonathan looked at each other. They knew the importance of what had just happened. In another situation, a party would be held with shouts of joy to celebrate the end of the little girl's silence. But now they didn't know what to do. That was when Mariana started talking to Kelly, calming her down and saying that her father was a leader in his profession, that he would surely be able to save that person, and that would be everything all right. Kelly stayed with Mariana for a long time, and Jonathan also joined in that hug. Dr. Cooper prepared the library to receive the newly operated patient. Paul's recovering power surprised even the doctor. In 3 hours, he had reacted and was able to speak. Paul gave orders that the family could move around the house. Dr. Cooper didn't have many resources, and he had to appeal to ancient medicine, resources that his great-grandfather used so that Paul could become strong enough and be able to leave the house. He asked Lucy to prepare a very consistent broth that was being administered spoonful after spoonful, trying the miracle. Nobody slept that night except Kelly and Jonathan, who at one point practically passed out, both leaning on Mariana. As soon as the sun came out, Paul instructed his accomplices to prepare everything for their trip. They would use the doctor's car, big enough to accommodate them. The terror of doubt took over all the adults in the house. Would they keep their promise to keep them alive? Paul was now giving orders to the doctor. He should not comment on what happened to anyone, since if he would do it, Paul's enemies would come for him and his family. After all, he had saved him. He wrote down the address where he could go for his car. The keys would be left in the contact. Rest assured, doctor, I will take care of you and your family, he said when leaving. A few seconds passed before the astonishment passed and they could react, move. David ran to see his children and hug them. The tears came when Kelly said, "Dad, I was so scared." The doctor looked at Mariana and she had the feeling it was the first time he had seen her. They agreed that none of them would comment on what had happened. In addition to Paul's warning, Dr. Cooper believed he could be held responsible for assisting a fugitive from justice. Silence would be his salvation. Part 15. Where did you work in California?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Estela's dissatisfaction didn't cease. On the contrary, it seemed to increase every day. Aunt Jemima was very concerned because even the consultations with the psychologist hadn't helped. But she was remembering the received advice, and although she wasn't quite understanding its reason, she tried to follow it. She left one of her jobs so that she could spend more time at home, so that at least in the mornings she could dedicate herself more to her niece, showing that she wasn't alone, that she would always have her support. She was surprised by the result, because the more she was dedicating herself, the more Estela seemed to isolate herself. Depression was a very difficult disease to fight against. She would not give up helping her niece. Estela was feeling herself more and more controlled. It was impossible to fight against anyone who wanted to guide her life if she was in the horse's mouth. So she made the decision to release herself once and for all. Throughout the year, she had kept at her aunt's suggestion, her entire salary. Aunt Jurema said to be important to save out for the university and started to make accounts with her niece. If she would save $900 a month, after a year, he would save $10,800. In 2 years, it would be $21,600. Maybe they wouldn't pay the university total, but Aunt Jurema would help with missing amount. The most important thing was to think about the future, that she could make a lot of progress in her life. But Stella hadn't decided yet which university to attend. She hadn't decided, although she was feeling that her aunt practically was torturing her with so many questions, with so much intrusion on her intimacy. Stella thought she earned very little. Besides, she didn't like the environment of her work. It was very annoying. The money she had saved was enough to keep her going for almost a year, so she decided to change jobs. When she found the card with Marisol's phone cleaning the bag, she immediately thought it was a message from the universe. Her destiny was much greater than being washing dishes, cleaning and serving tables. She called Marisol, who amazingly remembered her. She was prepared for long explanations that would identify her, since she imagined that after a year she would not be remembered, at least by phone. She was wrong. Marisol immediately recognized her and started talking as if they were great friends who had stopped seeing each other for just a few days. Marisol was sensational. She felt lucky to have such a friend. She thought of everything. The next day, in the morning, Stella received an envelope that contained her freedom letter. Now, she was Estela Fernandez, Marisol Fernandez's daughter, and a non-father of legal age. In addition to the new documentation, the envelope contained a one-way ticket to California for that same night. She was amazed at Marisol's efficiency and speed. She was incredible. That afternoon, when Aunt Jurema arrived from work, Stella already had her luggage ready. Aunt Jurema did not give credit to what she heard. Stella would move to California. As nothing she said dissuaded her from the decision, Aunt Jurema organized a Skype meeting with her parents. She was hoping that they would put some understanding in that little head. After all, she was just a girl. Stella tried to exercise the persuasion power she knew how to use so well, but felt that she wasn't enforcing her will until she threatened. if you prevent me from going to California, from opening my horizons for a better future, I will return to Brazil. Her parents knew that returning to Brazil would be a death sentence for their daughter, and through tears, they decided to keep quiet and admit Stella's decision. Mariana also attended the meeting, but didn't speak. She was still upset by what had happened at Dr. Cooper's house, and she couldn't discuss it with anyone. She couldn't think straight yet, so she was silent throughout the meeting and remained silent when everyone said goodbye. Aunt Jurema took Stella to the airport and said goodbye in tears. Part 16. How did you know Marisol Fernandez?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the 50th Amendment.
Life was back to normal, or almost normal, at the Cooper residence. Kelly had started talking again, which meant endless happiness for everyone in the house. It was as if the sadness of the loss of the mother had been broken, had been overcome. The psychologist said that she would no longer need to return, that it was important to continue with the routine that had made such progress possible. But how to continue with same routine? Now, the fear that something similar could happen was clouding their minds. Not being able to talk about what happened wasn't helping to overcome it, despite the fact of David to be much more at home now that he was accompanying Mariana and his children in all activities, including taking them to school. He was feeling that it wasn't enough. Their children needed something more to overcome the fear that remained in their hearts. He decided on an extended vacation. They would be 2 or 3 months in California with his mother. After all, that was a promise he had already made some time ago, to take the grandchildren to be with the grandmother a little, who loved them so much and who had stopped her own life for a long time to be with them. He decided that Mariana, if she wanted to, would also go. Lucy preferred to stay in Florida, as she had her family to look after. Besides, she would be at the house twice a week, so she could keep it clean for when they decided to come back, preventing it from looking like an abandoned house. David decided to rent a motorhome for the trip. That way, they would have more contact with nature and more freedom. He could return it when they got to Los Angeles and decide how to get home after the holidays. After all, it was a dream he had since being young, to cross the United States from end to end without worrying about schedules, with no established time to arrive. That night, after everyone having their suitcases ready and the children slept, David asked Mariana to help him organizing the route. It was almost 3,900 kilometers, and he wanted the whole trip to be fun for his children. They would stop to eat wherever they would want. They would see what they would want. They would be as long as they would decide. Each very time, each very place. So, the route would have a minimum of boundaries. It would be free of obligations. Together, they designed the route that, after all, would mean fun and freedom. The trip would have to pass through Daytona, Jacksonville, New Orleans, San Antonio, El Paso, Tucson, Phoenix, and finally they would be in Los Angeles. But they would visit any and all cities found along the way that the children would want to visit. David called his mother up to communicate his decision and became very happy with her response. She thought it was a great idea, that they should take as long as they would want on the trip, that it would be phenomenal, and that for sure children and himself would feel very well. She was also very happy to have her grandchildren at home for some time. It would be great, a great decision. Mariana had called Aunt Jemima up much later that night, as she couldn't be gone that long without her to know where she was. She became surprised by the news, but very happy by her niece to have the opportunity to visit new cities. Without any doubt, it would be an excellent trip, and she would meet a lot of people along the way. Besides, Estela had been in Los Angeles for 4 months and had stopped communicating with her aunt. On the last call, she said to be too busy and couldn't call very often up. It was an interesting coincidence. She actually suggested Mariana to try finding out if her cousin was really well, as she had wanted to convince her. They knew that what Stella used to say wasn't always the truth. The trip took 10 days. They stopped at every beach in the way to Jacksonville, and also in many inland towns. They took many pictures. David allowed his children to choose their food, even if it was outside the balanced food norms he always was demanding at home. The grandmother's joy felt when the grandchildren arrived could be felt in the air, her eyes shining. They immediately started telling the adventure that the trip had been. They'd want to show all the pictures even before eating. But in that euphoria, it was evident that the biggest adventure had been their visit to Daytona Speed Race. They told their grandmother about every and each detail of the pre-stop's visit. They showed the great emotion felt. Jane was listening very carefully. She observed every detail, commented on each photo, making affectionate and pleasant comments about each one. But there was something observed by her that she wouldn't comment on, either at that moment or ever. Her grandchildren didn't appear in any photo without Mariana being there. Not even those who were with their father. Jane already had the house organized for the visit and showed everyone which room they would stay in. David would stay in the room where he had spent all his childhood and youth. Kelly and Jonathan would share the nest room with 2 single beds, which the grandmother had arranged in order to have everything they needed at hand. Mariana would stay in the guest room next to the kitchen. The guest room was a suite with a balcony overlooking the pool and a beautiful garden. Everyone slept well all night and got up very early. They wanted to enjoy their vacation. Mariana also got up very early, but agreed with the children that she wouldn't be with them that day. She would visit a friend who was living in Los Angeles and would be out most of the day. The children had complained a little, but soon devoted themselves to planning some outings together with their grandmother and their father. They were seeming happy. Mariana drank coffee, got dressed, took Stella's address, which Aunt Jurema had given her, and called an Uber. When she gave the address to the driver, he warned her that would leave her there, but that he wouldn't be awaiting. Mariana found the situation very strange, but agreed. She thought of asking the reason, but stayed silent. When arriving at the address, she was attended by a very friendly lady. She talked a lot, talking all the time as if they had known each other for a long time. Stella wasn't at home. She had gone out with her mother. Her mother? Yes, with Mrs. Marisol. Mariana was invited to enter and wait in the room for the ladies to arrive. It was a huge room, very beautiful, but the decor wasn't much modern. A little dark, despite having 2 giant windows overlooking a balcony. She accepted a coffee and stayed for 2 hours waiting for her cousin to arrive. But the wait wasn't at all a waste of time. That nice lady looked like she'd swallowed a record player. She kept talking. She thought that Marisol was an entrepreneurial woman, very intelligent, who had a great fortune and owned 5 nightclubs in the city. That now that her daughter had become her right hand, she was going to expand her business. Marisol brought her doctor from her country 4 months ago, and she was a perfect copy of her mother. Very smart and very dedicated to business. Both the mother and the daughter were very good persons, almost angels, since they used to treat the dancers with great affection, with great consideration. But they were business women, so they could seem a little hard in some decisions. It was necessary, since they were women in a man's world. Mariana listened very carefully, trying not to jump to conclusions, since everything was seeming unreal. When Estela arrived, together to Marisol, she could see what was really happening. She hardly had recognized her. The cousin had changed her hair color and was dressed in very elegant, yet very extravagant clothing. She realized that Estela's hair color was now the same as Marisol's. After the shock of being surprised to find her cousin in the living room, Stella gave her a hug, as if everything was fine, if there was absolutely nothing to explain. She took Mariana to her room so that they could have more intimacy, and had started talking without stopping, without allowing any interruption from her cousin. She was having the life she had asked of God. She was Marisol's right hand, taking care of her business in the city. Soon, Marisol was going to expand her business to other cities, and Stella would be entirely responsible for them. In reality, everyone was thinking her to be her daughter, and that was very convenient. She was feeling very happy, making a lot of money, and she didn't want anything to get in the way of her current situation. Mariana said goodbye, with the certainty that her cousin was being fulfilled, had found herself. Yes, this was Estela. Mariana knew that she wasn't being used, quite the contrary. They would be in touch by phone. Marisol had called a non-taxi up to take her, and they said goodbye. Part 17. What is your involvement with Marisol?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Upon arriving, Mariana wanted to pay, but the taxi driver said it was already paid and wished her an excellent stay. There was no one at home, but the key to the entrance was under the plant pot, as they had told. It was mind-blogging that people left their house keys under a plant pot, as she'd seen in the movies. She entered, and as feeling a knot in her stomach, despite not having lunch, she preferred to go to her room and rest. She was feeling a not explained tiredness. It was like a spirit weariness, since physically there would be no reason to. She called on Jurema and told her the truth. Estela was doing very well. Marisol was treating her like a daughter, and nobody had to worry about her. She didn't know how much had slept when everyone arrived. The room was invaded by the children, telling all the day news, super happy. Jane, at the door, asked the children and Mariana to dress up. They all would be out for dinner in an hour time. Mariana then returned to her own world and tried to participate in that party that was being the clothes choice for Kelly. She was surprised by Jonathan asking her if everything was okay and reassured him. Everything was all right. On time, they were all at the front door, ready to leave. Jane drove to Osteria Mosa. She loved Italian food, and since she used to go there with friends, she got the reservation. Mariana was amazed at the exhibition dedicated to mozzarella, ricotta, and buttera, all of them imported from Italy. Of course, everyone asked for pasta. The sauces were finger-licking good. Adults had drank wine, also imported. Many photos were taken so that they would never forget such a happy dinner. On the way home, Jane preferred David to drive. She had drunk a lot of wine. In the arrival, however, she suggested David to take advantage of the fact that he was already driving and show Mariana a little of the city. She would put the children to bed. Mariana was embarrassed, said that she would already have the opportunity to visit the city. But Jane insisted, and apparently David was never contradicting her. He took her to Beverly Hills. They passed incredible places on many restaurants, clubs, and pubs, and entered the spare room. It was the first time that Mariana was playing bowling. Of course, the greatest fun was for David, and it was due to Mariana's efforts to play. She struggled, but it seemed impossible for the balls to remain on the track. David told her about his games with his friends. There he had met his wife Agatha. She was also a terrible player, but in just a few hours she ended up beating him and his friends. He'd lost her phone, and they'd lost contact, despite the Cupido's arrow that both had felt. Then fate did its part, and on the first day at the university, in an anatomy class, they met themselves again. Needless to say, they had been no longer far from each other. They were together every day until they graduated. He, an intensive medicine doctor, and she, as a doctor of pediatrics. Recently graduated, both were looking for experience and, why not, adventures. They were very young and felt the need to know the world, to do something really important. They were admitted to Doctors Without Borders. They get married in a very discreet ceremony, 2 days before the first trip. Only the family and closest friends were present. As they would be traveling for 2 years, they asked for the gift to be donated in cash to Doctors Without Borders. They spent a year in Zimbabwe and almost a year in the Democratic Republic of Congo. When Agatha became pregnant, they decided to return and move to Florida. The families were very happy with their return home and were of great help, including financial one, for them to settle down. Both Agatha and David got a job at Broward Health Medical Center. Pregnancy hadn't been an impediment. Dr. A. Cooper was highly respected professionally, and so was he. Even before Jonathan's birth, they had already bought the mansion. But after Kelly's birth, Agatha was already showing the result of those years at MSF, of the malaria, of the physical deterioration she had suffered, and the last 3 years had been a fierce struggle to become stronger. They hadn't won the battle. The fulminant heart attack took her away. David commented to Mariana that she was the first person he spoke to after his wife's death. Of course, talking about his personal life. He felt that he was releasing himself from a burden when talking about the facts. Speaking, he relived the happiness spent with Agatha, those happy moments. At the same time, he was feeling the sadness settled in his heart with the loss of his great love to be broke. That, somehow, he was getting rid of that pain. Perhaps Mariana should study psychology. She was already an excellent psychologist. Part 18. Tell me about the victim's family.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Jane was trying to be as much as possible with her grandchildren. Every morning they woke up with a tour schedule already prepared. Each day's schedule was put to a vote during breakfast, but only the children had a voice. Grandma's things. Both their father and Mariana were also invited, of course. Almost every day the first walk was to the beach, then city tours, the Griffith Planetarium, the Walk of Fame, the Chinese Theater, the Museum of Art. In short, every day something new to see. Mariana chose not to accompany them to Disneyland. She would stay at home for a day, resting, getting organized, as with Jane taking care of them, she was practically not necessary. She became surprised, realizing that David had also stayed at home. He needed to answer some calls from his colleagues at the hospital. His last publication in Health magazine had been a success, and everybody wanted to comment it. After 5 months, it was still very current. Mariana prepared lunch for both. She won many compliments. She was an excellent cook. She didn't know how to answer when he asked her if there was anything she didn't do well. David couldn't stop laughing when he realized that Mariana's face was red with shame. So they decided to take a little advantage of that wonderful sun in the pool. David moved the loungers over so they could talk. Mariana didn't know that side of him. He didn't stop talking when she was around. He used to talk about everything: politics, other countries, the hunger that plagued the world, the ease of communication of the modern world, and the spiritual difficulty of modern men. He also was showing to understand art, and Mariana was increasingly enchanted by his intelligence. David was asking her thoughts about this, who she knew about that, and she was always absolutely sincere. In fact, he was also enchanted by her intelligence. They closed their eyes for a few moments, and Mariana's cell phone rang. It was on Jurema. Mariana excused herself and went to the bedroom to talk to her aunt, who almost never was calling. Norberto was out of prison. He had gained a kind of probation to await trial. It was not yet known when it would be, nor was it known whether Estela would be forced to testify. Mariana felt a chill down her spine that she couldn't explain. She called Estela up and asked her to be very careful. The cousin remained calm, and with her logic, she even managed to reassure her. He couldn't find her, since she had a new name and new friends. She had a new life, wasn't the same person. That day, Mariana no longer returned to the pool. After the news, she felt a kind of tiredness. She preferred to rest until the children's arrival. Jane continued to monopolize her grandchildren, and David began to prefer taking short walks, to which Mariana was invited. Walks on the beach, visits to the shops in town, meeting some friends for long conversations in some bar. Mariana was always there. She was a perfect companion. She used to listen very carefully, laughing at all his jokes, answering whenever she was asked about something, and keeping silent whenever necessary. Every night the children were talking to her a lot, every detail of their day, what they had eaten, and where they had gone. David started to be present in these conversations. Emotion took over Mariana when Kelly told her, with all the innocence and sincerity of a child, that her day would only been perfect if Mariana had been with her. David listened that and looked at his daughter, showing to be moved too. They had been back in the tours together with the children. The days passed on, and after 2 months of vacation, David decided to return home. Now they would return by plane. The children jumped for joy. It would be their first time in a plane. Jane, incredible as it may seem, immediately agreed. Mariana was hoping that she would try to extend the children's stay a little longer, but she was a very intelligent woman. She knew that they should return to the routine necessary for their development, back to reality, now that they were stronger, having more structure. Jane believed that love strengthens and structures souls. Mariana was also surprised by Jane's tight hug at the farewell. Part 19. What about your relationship?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
At home, they were welcomed by Lucy with great joy and a lunch that looked like a banquet. Everything was perfectly clean, everything in place, very organized. The next day, the children were already back at school, and Mariana was already preparing to provide the support she knew they would need to overcome 2 months of absence. She talked a lot with Kelly and Jonathan, and together they'd organized a new routine which would last until all difficulties at school were overcome. Basketball and outings only on weekends. Dr. Cooper also returned to his daily work routine at the hospital. Mariana started studying the possibility of doing psychology online at the International University of Florida. She had saved enough for the first 2 years of the course and could attend the face-to-face classes while the children were at school. But there were some changes in the house, and the most significant was in David's daily routine. He started to work on his research only at home, making himself present almost every night and at least 2 mornings every week. He continued to talk a lot with Mariana and proposed that, especially for hers and children's safety, they should have a gun at home. Mariana knew what he was talking about, without even mentioning what security he was referring to, and agreed. That morning, they went out together and bought a revolver Rossi 851 caliber 38. David thought it wouldn't be enough to have a gun at home, and he organized target shooting classes for both. If they now had to have a gun at home, they needed to know how to use it. A long conversation with the children was necessary that evening. They ought know where the gun was kept, but they should never touch it. It was for protection and couldn't mean a danger. More and more, David and Mariana were together, participating in all the children's activities. He also was taking advantage of the absence of the little ones to ask Mariana, helping him with his research, always taking her opinions into account. That day, David asked her out for lunch. He asked Lucy to make a reservation for 2 in Texas, Brazil. Mariana dressed very elegantly. After all, it was the first time she was going to have lunch with David in Fort Lauderdale. It would be almost like remembering the good times they had spent in Los Angeles. That great friendship had remained, and Mariana was very happy. What she didn't expect was that, before dessert, David would kneel before her with a wedding ring in his hands and would ask her to marry him. She was astonished, but said yes. Right there, they exchanged their first kiss. Everyone in the restaurant was clapping hands. Mariana felt like she was in a movie. Upon arriving home, Mariana was euphoric and ran to show Lucy the ring. She already knew and was very happy. She said that Mariana could always count on her friendship and support. Mariana became a little afraid when David wanted to call his mother. What would Jane think about? But surprises didn't stop. Jane already knew her son's decision, and she had supported it from the beginning. David, later on, commented that his mother's response had been, "At last you woke up." They went for the children at school together, and since no one said a word during all the way, The children suspected that something different was happening. Their first question was whether the grandmother would be at home. They kept asking questions about what was going on during all the way. Upon arrival, everybody sat in the room, and David commented on his decision. The wedding would be as soon as possible. Mariana was still feared that the children could reject that decision. It was a few seconds of uncertainty. They were saying nothing, and she thought that perhaps they had rushed to tell them the news without having prepared them. Then Kelly got up, went to Mariana, and gave her the most affectionate hug she had ever felt. Jonathan followed, and in a few seconds, everyone was hugging and crying. They wept with joy, including David. Lucy, who had stayed behind the door so as not to miss anything that was said, wept with joy too. They were going out to celebrate, and this time Lucy was invited. Part 20. What's your involvement with international trafficking?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Next 2 months rushed by. David didn't want to waste any more time, and the wedding was scheduled. It would be a simple ceremony next to the pool, in which only the family would be. Not even friends were invited. Even so, Mariana was very busy with her wedding dress and the children's clothing. She also renewed her wardrobe. She would be very stylish in Hawaii. She had called Estela, who, to her surprise, said she would not lose her cousin's wedding for anything. She would also spend 10 days there on vacation, so she could help Jane and Lucy while they were enjoying honeymoon. Yes, it would be 5 days and 6 nights in Hawaii. Anjurema would also be at the wedding. Too bad her parents couldn't come. But there was no time for sadness. There was a lot to do. The big day has come. Jane, Anjurema, John, Lucy, Kelly, and Jonathan were waiting, standing by the pool, together to David. Stella helped Mariana get ready and accompanied her to the small improvised altar where the pastor and David were waiting. Happiness was in the air. Lunch was served. It had been hired by Lucy, very helpful as always. They were by the pool for hours, talking, laughing, starting a new story, that of the family that had just been constituted. Anjurema and John said goodbye early. She had avoided unpleasant conversations with Estela. She thought this wasn't the time. David and Mariana soon weren't there. They still had to finish packing. The flight would leave in the morning. Jonathan and Kelly played for a while on the basketball court. Jane and Stella took the opportunity to savor a drink, enjoying the last sunshine rays. The next day, the surprise. On the front page of the newspaper, the highlight of Dr. Cooper's wedding photo. No one knew how the paparazzi had achieved it. He would probably be hiding in the trees. David and his mother amused themselves by commenting that he had been unknowingly ascended to movie star. Just this could explain the interest in his wedding. Besides, they had achieved a perfect angle where everyone was, without a doubt, a show of professionalism. The trip was perfect. The reception at Four Seasons Maui was brilliant. French champagne waiting in the suite with a huge fruit basket. The views could only be compared to a picture painted by the angels. The evening, a picture inviting love. The restaurant super romantic. Without a doubt, they would spend the best days of their lives there. Before any tour, they called the children. It was incredible, but they were already missing them. Perhaps it had been a good idea that they had accompanied them. David immediately reminded her that it was the honeymoon. They would make the most of their intimacy, which they hadn't yet experienced. The days flew by. Every morning they were spending a few hours on the beach in front of the hotel, but each day they were having lunch at a different restaurant. Thus, they were taking the opportunity to visit the isle, which was immense. Before dinner, a drink and Hula's presentation in front of the restaurant. Mariana even risked some movement, which showed that she still had that waddled from her country. Time passed on, and they discovered more about each other. That affection, that love, installed itself more strongly in their hearts. When they were preparing suitcases to return home, an ambiguous feeling was aroused. They were wanting to return. Were missing the children a lot, but all the intimacy that they had experienced had been unforgettable. They would not allow this to end for nothing. But the desire for intimacy was totally forgotten with the party prepared by the children. At the entrance was a banner where could be read, "Welcome home." Many kisses, many hugs, and both thinking that, yes, this deserved to endure, not ending for anything. Love. After a few hours telling details of the trip and seeing photos, everyone went to rest. The next day, children would have class, and Jane already had her ticket purchased. She was going back home. Part 21. Have you got married to stay in this country?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
Everybody got up very early. The children had protested a little because Mariana wouldn't take them to school. She had the bags to unpack, a lot to organize, but she promised to pick them up and they would do a double session of activities. Ice cream along the way and basketball until dinner time. Besides, as they had time, the father proposed to take the grandmother to the airport. Mariana and Estela took advantage of the fact that Lucy hadn't arrived yet to have a long coffee and talk for a while. They had a lot to talk about. Estela wanted her cousin to understand how fine she was doing, and they spent a lot of time talking. Mariana didn't agree. If her cousin liked her new life, nothing to do. When the doorbell rang, Mariana opened the door, thinking that Lucy would have forgotten her keys. She thought it was a nightmare. There was Norberto aiming a gun at her. Before she could have any reaction, Norberto had pushed her inside and closed the door. Estela could see her cousin falling and ran to help her up when she realized who was responsible. Norberto made them sit down on the sofa and, always pointing, he started talking softly. He was speaking quietly and very slowly. "You were beautiful in the photo, my dear," he said, addressing Stella. He began to tell how much he had suffered in jail, the atrocities he had suffered, and repeated, "It's your fault, Stella." He said that cellmates had broken him whole, that he spent 3 months in the hospital recovering, and repeated, "It's your fault, Stella." He said that had no way to go to his mother's funeral and repeated, "It's your fault, Stella." He said he would not return to prison, so both had to die, and repeated, "It's your fault, Stella." That was when, without being able to understand how, David had entered and was fighting with Norberto. It took Mariana a few seconds to wake up from her trance generated by fear and open the drawer where the .38 was kept when she heard the shot. David was down, bloody. Norberto was dragging Estela by the hair, Mariana fired 3 times in his direction. Norberto pushed Estela to steering wheel of David's car, which was still connected, and ran away. Mariana, still holding the gun in her hands, was screaming for David, trying to get him to wake up when Lucy arrived. The police had arrived with the ambulance, and Mariana tried to accompany her husband to the hospital, but was stopped. She would have to accompany the police to the police station to tell them what had happened. The weapon was kept with the care that evidence of an assassination attempt is kept. Without her realizing it, the technical police were already at her home, taking blood samples, taking photos, trying to carefully preserve the crime scene. She didn't know what to think on the way to the police station. She was very scared. Where would be Estela? What would Norberto have done to her? She asked Lucy to take care of picking the children from school up. She would soon be back. But it wasn't so. After 2 hours of explaining what had happened to Inspector Collins, Inspector Bennet came in. Mariana thought she was going home, asked about her husband, wanted to know how he was doing, but the inspector only replied, "Here I am asking the questions. Why did you shoot your husband? Tell me what happened." "What?" "So they thought she'd shot David." A tear escaped and came down her face. She wanted to cry a lot. Maybe she could thus dispel that pain in her chest. But she couldn't cry. She didn't know how that tear had escaped. Then she started to repeat everything that had happened again, repeating it countless times for Inspector Bennet, and once again repeating it for Inspector Collins. No idea of how long she had been telling what had happened, but she thought it must be done when she came in. "I'm Elizabeth Fisher. My client won't say another word. Obviously, you already know that anything she'd said up to this point cannot be used in court." But then she was in one of the films she has watched on television. It was certainly just a nightmare. At any moment, she would be awakened. Perhaps she would be at the age of 18, young and hopeful in Brazil. Yes, maybe nothing had happened since she was waiting for her cousin to return from Paraisópolis to go home together. At any moment, she would awake. She was taken to a cell, still inside the police station. Staying alone for a while, she tried to think. She couldn't eat anything. She couldn't feel her stomach, not knowing if was hungry. Anyway, she couldn't eat. When Dr. Fisher entered the cell, she felt great relief. Thinking that would be going home then, she was explained what was going on. Aunt Jemima had hired her. Her fees were very high, but Aunt Jemima said she would do whatever would be necessary to get her niece released. She knew that her niece wasn't blame. If necessary, she would sell her house to pay the lawyer. Mariana listened to everything said, but she couldn't get her thoughts in order. Nothing was making sense. She felt great relief when learning that David wasn't died, that the surgery to extract the bullet hadn't been successful, but he was still alive. The doctors had managed to stabilize him, but the bullet was located so that he could die if they tried to extract it. He was in an induced coma until his body was responding fully. There was a lot of hope, because although he had lost a lot of blood, he was a very strong man. So, as he was still alive, Mariana would be accused of homicide attempt, a first-degree crime in that state. The only alternative that the lawyer understood be possible to ease the sentence would be to claim self-defense. What? Mariana heard everything and continued not understanding. The nightmare was continuing. Self-defense? She hadn't shot her husband. The lawyer explained that the evidence was contradicting her claims. The gun had been analyzed and had fired 3 shots. 2 bullets were found on the room wall, and 1 bullet was locked in Dr. Cooper's head. It couldn't be extracted. The gunpowder residues in Mariana's hands and her fingerprints on the gun indicated that she had fired. She had been found with the murder weapon in hand, next to the victim. Of course, she'd shot Norberto. If only 2 bullets had been found, the 3rd would certainly have hit him. Mariana once again told the whole story, now to her lawyer. She made it clear that they would not claim self-defense because she hadn't shot her husband. Then the lawyer advised her that until the trial, she wouldn't answer any questions. She should accept the 5th Amendment to avoid saying something that could be used to incriminate her even more. She would hire an investigator to try locating Norberto and Stella, but she advanced that the possibilities weren't very encouraging, because in one day he could have left the country. He probably came in with a fake passport. She was also very sincere in saying that the chances that Estela would continue to live were minimal, but that if her body were found, the story could be more credible. At the time, investigators had been identifying Norberto as the ghost. Her first statements wouldn't be used in the trial, but that was demonstrating that the responsible investigators didn't believe her version. When Mariana was alone again, her thoughts came in like a storm. My version? Jurema is an angel, a ghost? Would Norberto have left the country already? Where was the third bullet? How was the love of her life doing? How were the children doing? She felt her heart sink when thinking about the children. She thought that, for sure, Jane would already be in Florida, taking care of them. But how should Phil Kelly? She was so sensitive. She was unable to fall asleep. That thought made her shiver. Would she have to wish Estela being dead so that her body could be found, confirming her version? She refused it. Part 22. Who is this ghost you named Norberto?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question and assert the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment.
A day passed on, and Mariana felt like it had been a year. Nobody gave her news from David. She didn't know if he could have awakened. She knew nothing of the children. She still didn't know if at any time any evidence had been found which would confirm her version. Her version, the truth. That's when Inspector Collins and Bennett entered the cell. Inspector Bennett looked at Mariana and said, "We are waiting for Dr. Fisher to arrive to release you. But I'm very curious to know how you have friends in Hialeah." In Hialeah? Mariana didn't know what she was talking about. When the lawyer arrived, while the documentation was being prepared for her release, Mariana could know what had happened. Norberto had a friend at Hialeah, a small-scale criminal who took him in when he arrived, wounded, with Estela. He'd helped him to tie Estela to a chair. Norberto believed that she could be his passport to leave the country, so he wanted to keep her alive. He had been hit in the arm and had lost a lot of blood, but his friend took care of the wound and he would soon feel much better. However, nothing could happen in Hialeah without Paul being informed. In reality, without his authorization. As Paul knew what happened to Dr. Cooper from the newspapers, it wasn't difficult to understand who he was and immediately summoned Norberto's friend. His orders were clear and should be followed to the letter. An anonymous call informed Inspector Bennett of the exact address where Norberto and the hostage were. Bennett hadn't given faith to what she heard. The police could come in and arrest him. The police had been prepared very carefully, as they still thought it could be a trap. They knew that Paul was in charge there, and they couldn't understand why he was authorizing his home invasion. But Bennett was beginning to believe in Mariana and took responsibility for the action. When the police arrived, the impression they had was that the neighborhood was a ghost neighborhood. There was no living soul on the street. No one in the building they were breaking into. When they knocked the door down, Norberto received them by shooting. He was shot down. They untied Stella, who was immediately taken to the hospital. She was alive, but she had been beaten a lot. She was unconscious. At the hospital, Stella awake, and despite being very weak, she could repeat to the Inspector Bennett the same story she had heard over and over again from Mariana. Dr. Fisher took Mariana to the hospital where David was. She didn't want to be a moment more far from her love. When she arrived, the children ran to hug her. Not for a moment had they believed in her guilt. They knew she was innocent. Jane also received her with a hug, happy that her innocence had been proven. They went into David's room together and heard, "Where were you?" Tears flooded those women's souls. The children were asked in to be able to be with their father for a while, but the doctors asked everybody to leave. Dr. Cooper needed to be quiet in order to fully recover. Jane took Mariana and the children home. Everyone needed to rest before returning to the hospital. Mariana needed to get some sleep. Upon arriving, Mariana and the children were startled. Did the nightmare continue? Paul and his cronies were at the door, waiting for them. Jane, who didn't know him, got out of the car and approached Paul, but Mariana and the children remained in the car. The fear they were feeling had paralyzed them. Paul approached and said to Mariana, "Tell the doctor that we are already at peace," and was gone.